Good morning, everyone. This is one of my first live chats I have done after the last previous little sample I said last week. Well, I just sort of bring you first of all up to speed. I'm speaking here from regional Victoria or central Victoria. It's currently raining outside and very cold. Regional Victoria is in level 3 lockdown restrictions in regards to this COVID-19, and Melbourne's in level 4. And so people are very restricted where they can go at the moment, but we do need to get it on top of this virus again. We just discovered there's been another 19 cases here in central Victoria overnight, and it certainly is very concerning how this virus can spread very quickly. It's something very, very serious. It's also one thing we take very seriously with this virus, because, as I said, it's not a guarantee if you get it, if you're going to survive either. It's just the other day where there was someone in their 30s passed away of this virus. So it's not a guarantee at all. But just because you might be young, you might be healthy, super fit, etc., it's not a guarantee of your survival if you do catch this. So we do have to do everything our bit to actually put a stop to this COVID-19. It's something we cannot take too lightly, folks. And look, seriously, everyone around the world, I wanted to take this very serious. There's no conspiracy. It's not made up by some flying spaghetti monster through the 5G network. This is a deadly virus, once and for all. It's not just a flu. It is a deadly virus. And it's not just the elderly or people who are very sick that are affected. It can be anyone. So just please take care. And at this time, that's what we're trying to do. We've got border restrictions. We can't travel interstate either. Neither can we fly overseas at the moment as well. But this is what's got to happen. I don't like it. I don't think anyone likes it. When we're out and about, at work or wherever, we have to wear face masks. It's not something that we love. Someone said a smart comment to me the other day in the supermarket about it, and I just turned around and said, "You think I love doing this?" No. So that's it. Certainly is what. That's where we are at the moment. The other thing as well, we had situations where people we had one situation where one person, she went into a hardware shop, the workers there instructed her to put a face mask on. All she did then proceed to abuse them. And then she was all believed the shop by the manager, and the police sat around and she would abuse them as well. That's not on. As far as I care, abusing workers in their workplace. Understand a supermarket, a shop, or whatever is also a workplace. Just like a bus, a train, or an aeroplane, etc. No one has the right to abuse those workers, and it is their workplace. If you walk onto a construction site, you see the signs there, you must wear a hard hat, the safety glasses, etc. Well, just because your personal liberty overrides everything, you're going to take that hard hat off and have an object fall on your head and kill you. So that's something we've always got to be vigilant on as well. There's just to be no tolerance of that. I believe some of these so-called libertarians, conspiracy theorists, are trying to organise a rally in Melbourne today or tomorrow, whatever. I don't think there's going to be a huge turnout. Personally, I think they're going to feel the full brunt of the law, and good for once. I'm actually really sick and tired of all these type of people trying to create more conspiracy, more harm, and disunity as well. And actually, they play a role too, deliberately diverting the working class attention from the real cause of the problem with the COVID-19, which is capitalism itself. So anyway, more further ado, just more cheerful thing. I want to talk about trade unions today, and we'll lead a little bit in political economy. First of all, I just want to announce tomorrow at 10 o'clock Australian Eastern Standard Time and 8 o'clock US Eastern Standard Time, myself and Dus James are continuing on reading the history of the Free Internationals. I highly recommend this book. It's a good introduction to Marxism, a good textbook study of it. This is dialectical materialism, historical materialism in motion. This is matter in motion. When you read this, it's a big book, yes, but it's actually very easily understood. And I highly recommend this to anyone instead of just going straight to the classic texts. This is a good introduction to it. William Z. Foster was just fantastic how he put things out. This is for working class people to easily absorb and read as well. So we've got two more sections on the Third International, or the Comintern, otherwise known on that, and then obviously we'll discuss about other material we'll study from there on. So that's vitally important. 10 o'clock tomorrow, Australian Eastern Standard Time, and that'll be, I believe, it's 8 o'clock US Eastern Standard Time in the United States there, in Canada, etc. Well, I'll just say some of my background. I've been a member of a union for over 26 years now, and I've also been an organiser. I'm currently am an organiser at the moment as well. So I've played an active role in all sorts of levels in my union from all around Australia. And I've been shop steward, been a general activist, been on many picket lines and a number of campaigns and strikes as well. But what I actually wanted to inspired me to do this discussion is a lot of socialists/communists. I read a lot of comments, be it on Caleb Morpin's page, lives, or everyone else's, and comments on Facebook that it's either two extremes. It's basically one, either attacking unions or looting leaderships, or the other extreme just not doing anything. Or what can we do? Just give up. I think I think we need to actually look at some practical things what communists and socialists can do within regards to trade unions. And I think it's very important field of work still. Now, I know in Australia here, the union representation is around about 15% of the whole entire workforce, unlike it was many years ago. And I guess that too in New Zealand and Canada, US, UK, and other places around the world that really copped a lot of neoliberal policies implemented over the years and a lot of attacks on it. But that doesn't stop us from being involved. Now, the first thing I want to ask you is, what is a trade union? What is a trade union? A trade union is a basic form of working class organisation where a group of workers, be it on a particular trade or occupation or into an industry, together for some common causes, for their common interests. It's virtually a form of a united front organisation. It's a very basic form of working class organisation. It's not the most advanced level like we do here. Workers need a party, etc., etc. What Lenin actually stipulated many years ago. But what I want to do, and why is it important? Because it's where you get a concentration of workers together at any given time, and this is where we need to be involved with those workers as well, especially when they're engaged in even just a simple wages and conditions struggle, for example. So if they're going for a claim or for a higher pay or some improved conditions, what we do is help them connect the dots and explain it wasn't just a particular boss, it was actually the capitalist class itself. If you think of wages and conditions or a struggle or strike over of, say, a pay rise, that is a basic form of class struggle. Not an advanced form, but a basic form. If any of you might have read the three forms of struggle, you've got your economic, your political, and ideological, which is your higher form of struggle. So that's what we do as communists, is trying to help them understand the world. It is not just confined to their workplace, but this is around the world as well. It affects all workers. Now, in Australia at the moment, especially the very low-income people, and it's a very worrying time. People have got to understand that workers here are under attack, big time. Our wages and conditions. If you actually read the mainstream media or the Australian Financial Review, it's a great way to pick it up what the capitalist class are up to. They basically want to just tear everything to pieces. They want a low-wage police state, everyone casual, on and off work, no insecurity for workers at all. The workers now they're either over their heads in Hilton debt. They've obviously trying to pay off a house, and look, there's going to be many working families who are going to foreclose and lose their houses as well. I hate to be Mr. Doom and Gloom, but I'm just being realistic of what's happening here. And it's not just because of COVID-19, it's because the underlying pinning thing is the economic conditions are worsening for everyone here as well. And actually, one thing, going back to COVID-19, certainly exposed Australia just how vulnerable we really are. We haven't got a very strong domestic economy at all. It's interesting when they say how Australia's a wealthy country, etc. We're doing great. We've got a robust economy. Not really domestically. We've actually got a massive working poor as well. Everyone looks to target the US to say about their working poor. Well, hey, we've got it here too. No, we're no different. So going back to what I was saying, why is the importance of being involved in unions as well? We do need to bring that sense also collectivism, the sense of solidarity, brother and sisterhood, the comradeship back together as well, that we're not alone. Instead, this rampant individualism that's so rife within our societies at the moment, that you're pretty much on your own, and basically the employers or employer groups or whatever, the capitalists saying, your interest is with ours, come close to us, we'll look after you, which they've done for them successfully for the last 30, 40 years. Let's face it, that's what they've successfully done. And actually, Caleb Morpin pointed that out as well. And I can't wait for his book, The Synthetic Left, comes out, because this is what's happened over the years, where the left used to popularise a lot of things and do all this stuff and bring everyone together and united for a common cause, and then just sort of abandoned that over the years. And that's something we've got to get back to as well. So I want to try and generate that climate, that atmosphere, that sort of comradeship as well. But it's important that we do that with workers. The other important reason why we're also communist, socialist, Marxist, whatever you want to call yourselves, we need to be involved with working class people. This is where the hard yards, because when we talk to them, we've got to convince them also too, even those ones in unions, not just a basic wages and conditions consciousness, but develop that consciousness into a class consciousness, that they are working class. They have no interests. Their interests are not diametrically opposed to the capitalist class. Always have and always will be. It's a hard yard. And I'm not going to profess this is an easy job. I'm now an organiser, and look, I'm going to say this here. It's not just hey, presto, I'll go and say something and everyone goes, oh, yeah, off we go, revolution. It doesn't work that way at all. And certainly we've got 30, 40 years of poison out there that we've got to try, poisonous garbage that we've got to try and undo as well at the same time and tackle with. It certainly is, because a lot of people do not see in this country outside of the square, unfortunately. They do see, the pendulum might swing this way, might go that way, but they're only seeing things within the paragrams of capitalism. And so little things to always think outside the box. So, look, here's the first easy step I think I always suggest you do. Because, ask yourselves, are you a member of a union? Okay, some of you it might not be because of circumstances in your life. You might be out of work, etc., or you might be studying full-time or part-time, etc. I get that. But I think even if you're part-time and casual and full-time, join the first easy step, join your union. And it's important to join the union that's got the legal coverage of your classification for starters. That's vitally important. So this idea of competition union, our union's better than yours, etc., that doesn't build working class unity at all. And in fact, what it does is just breeds disunity, it breeds destruction, etc., etc. No. You need to do that first, and that's important. And I know some unions have got very conservative leaderships. I get that. But that doesn't start, but even Lenin stipulated this under left-wing communism and infantile disorder, and that's a very good book to read as well, to understand that there's no such thing as a pure union, a pure, working class union at all. And there's no such thing. I'm going to give you something, an example, it's a little bit different. The Chinese Communist Party, right? About 90 to 100 million members in that party. It's quite a big, right? Do you think that is everyone in that organisation is going to agree with each other? How can everyone scientifically, physically, I don't know, but you're going to agree with everyone on each other's point? That's impossible. So in a union, you're going to find the same thing. It's not going to be this pure thing of what we think it would, what it should be. So that's vitally important. And I understand, look, I've talked about it. There's obviously been talks about the Labor aristocracy and that. Well, yes, it's still there. But to a certain degree, that's going out of decline as well. As the material conditions change, so is even our Labor aristocracy is going out of being as well. Right? Imperialism is finding a way now. It's really, a lot of it, they don't need it anymore. Capitalist classes actually do not need a lot of other things. What we're seeing now in this age of accumulation through destruction, it's destroying its own institutions. Now, trade unions came into being because of capitalism. They didn't just go like a good idea just pop out of thin air. It didn't happen that at all. They came out of the conditions of both being in England at the time, or Britain at the time, Wales, England, Scotland, etc., and even in Europe as well. They developed out of a particular time when we had the Industrial Revolution. Before then, we had craft guilds, completely different from what an actual trade union is as well. So they came together in order to combine, in order for some common interests as well, to improve their conditions. Mind you, in England at the time, the conditions were horrible. Absolutely horrible. And interesting, when we talk about Australian history, it does go back to that. We had a lot of early trade unions transported to Australia in the colonial times because they combined into a union. It was actually a criminal offence. But you'd see the dank conditions they lived in. Their houses during winter were damp, cold, etc. And they lived in very cramped conditions as well. And people died in their 30s as well. If you lived to 40, you had to live a long life. In summertime, it was damp and hot. That's all it was. So you could just picture it was just basically a good hive of diseases, viruses, malnourishment, etc. Then their working conditions. Well, if you want a death sentence, go and work in a cotton mill of the 1800s. Wait till a belt from a lathe come flying off and then hit you very hard. And believe me, you won't even know it hit you. You'd be dead by the time it did. So that's certainly, that just gives you something, an example why workers did, and obviously combined as well. And obviously through there it developed. Yes, it was certain around particular trades or the crafts, hence the term trade union. At the time, the industrial work union type of unions didn't sort of come out until about later part of the 1800s, around the 1880s, 1890s, which was basically a low-income, semi-skilled, unskilled workers that needed to be organised. So that's where you get the idea where they came along. And actually, in this book, The Three Internationals, this was talked about, especially around the Marx and Engels time of the First International, when they started coming out through the formation of the early trade unions and the English Chartist movement as well. What was actually interesting on that, we had actually a lot of English Chartists transported here to Australia as well. It's where I live in the central Victoria. It's got a very rich history. And of that, we had the Tolpole Martyrs, the other early trade unions, English Charters. We had revolutionaries from Germany as well. So any of the Australian listeners listening here, it's not just the Germans, people of German descent living in Handorf in South Australia there. No, we had actually a lot of them. And don't be surprised they fought alongside Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels in the 1840s in Germany. A lot of them fled to Australia as well, fleeing political and religious persecution. We had Italian revolutionaries. We had French revolutionaries as well. We had quite a mixed mash, Irish rebels. So on the Victorian goldfields at the time. So these were all the precursors to our current trade union movement we have here in Australia. So it's quite a rich history we have here in Australia. It's worthwhile looking into it. And just before I go any further, I actually do recommend some books on Australian trade unions. One of the early books, it is rare to get, is this book. I don't know if you can read it. In The Dawn to Dusk by E.H. Lane, The Reminiscences of a Rebel. It's about it's written around about from 1890 period of the great shearers' strike they had in Queensland and the great maritime strikes and the formation of the early Labor Party, etc. And it's a very rich part right up through to pretty much the 1920s of the Union. It talked about the Russian Revolution as well, and I'll do another talk on this as well. Talked about New Australia, which was a utopian socialist commune in Paraguay. There was a whole lot of people left Australia around about 1899, 1900 on the ship, the SS Royal Tar. Who left Australia, wanted to form a new socialist utopia in Latin America, in a place in what is now Paraguay. I won't get into it, but there were splits, obviously. They formed two communes, and a lot of the descendants still live in Paraguay today. And some came back to Australia, obviously, after it all fell to bits. Some went to live in New Zealand. But this is a good book, Dawn to Dusk by E.H. Lane. Another one I want to show you as well, which is an excellent part of our rich trade union, is this one. I've always loved this. Green Band's Red Union. It's about the environmental activism and the New South Wales Builders Labourers Federation. And I can talk, if I've got some time, I will talk a little bit about that as well. And I've also, another one that played a very extensive role in our early trade union period, especially the early 1900s, is the IWW and Revolutionary Industrial Unionism. And it was huge, especially in regional areas of New South Wales, Queensland, Western Australia, and Victoria here as well, the one big union. Another one I actually like to raise as well is written by a long past comrade, by a comrade who passed away 10 years ago. It was Eureka and Beyond by Monty Miller. And Monty Miller, at that time, he was born in 1834 in Tasmania, but long story short, he fought in a very decisive battle of the Goldfields Rebellions, the Eureka Stockade. He later on, he was actually involved in a lot of workers' struggles through the 1800s. Member of the IWW, jailed in 1917 for sedition because he was anti-war. and then he passed away in 1920, the age of, I believe, be in his about 88 years of age. So he's actually one of our revolutionaries. See, it's around about the formation of the Communist Party of Australia at that time as well. Right, let's get back to what I was talking about, but I recommend there's some early reading of our history as well. So going on that's why it's vitally important. We do need to actually join our unions one way or the other and help them develop. Now, the second thing I need to explain to you, if you do join, don't just go charging into a workplace and want to try and make yourself expose yourself, and that, especially if you're dealing with a very hostile employer or a group of hostile employers, etc. And there's a lot of hostility towards unions from employers. The employer might be even a nice person, might have a very smiley face, but never kiss a smiling crocodile either, if you know what I mean. So, yeah, it's what you sometimes might have to be covert. And obviously, you might want to map your workplace as well. And obviously, you get in touch with your local union organiser, your local branch, or in America you call it a local, I understand. Get in touch with them and have some guidance there as well. Engage with them that way. But it gives you important. And unfortunately, in a lot of workplaces, you do have your snitch as well. So I'd always just be wary of that. But you start identifying those workers you can talk to, and maybe you have to after do an after-hours meeting off-site somewhere. And generate, maybe even around on a weekend, have a barbecue or something, and talk more some general organising that way. I wish I had this book on me at the moment. As another ex-reader's brother, Bill McKee, or Mackay. He was actually instrumental in forming the United Auto Workers in Detroit there back in the 20s and 30s, and that showed you some how they organised the place which led up to the famous sit-down strike in the Ford Motor Plants, the Rouge River Works. So that it showed you how that time how he operated, and not just himself personally, but others as well around him, and how they formed committees, etc. They had to keep that out of the eyes of Henry Ford and all his stooges. So that's vitally important, because I don't want to see someone going in there, hey, I'm a union member, and ticket, and then expose yourself. And next thing you know, you get tapped on the shoulder and saying, look, you're no longer required, unfortunately, and I'll see you later. So you don't want to be in that spot either. It doesn't give a good message to other fellow workers that as soon as you actually step out of the market like that. It's different if you do actually enter work into a strong place. I'll rephrase that again. It's different if you do start work at a place that's strongly unionised. You might have a shop steward there, or delegate, otherwise known, and you want to be involved. That's great. And look, you're already then miles ahead. You'll be able to know about the union structures and that. So you do need to engage that. And talk to the local union officials as well. You might not like some of the stuff you hear at times, but look, we always don't like what we hear all the time around us as well. But I don't like it. So. And that's also from practical side of things as well. But once you start doing and making those connections with the workers, obviously when you do get together, you've got to discover what common issues you've got amongst each other. Some might have some great ideas and everything else, but you need to work out some common things moving forward. But when it comes down to crunch time, and if you are successful in trying to organise a place as well, just remember the fight's not over yet. Because if you do, say for example, you all want to actually improve the safety of the place, and that obviously the employers are going to be dragging their feet, and they're going to do everything possible to win you over to their causes, or get rid of you altogether. And look, there's been millions of times when shop stewards organise, etc., then the employer turns around, oh, you make a great supervisor, you're really good at organising, etc. What they're trying to do is coax you onto their side. Always be aware of that. That is nothing new. It's been done ever since trade unions have been around as well. And unfortunately, we're going to have to come across that at times. But look, always be strong and select. No, we're here to improve our conditions. Is that? Well, if you do get to that level, but if you do get level, you've got a highly unionised workplace, or across not just your own workplace, but even across the industry, etc. That's where you know when you're in a moment of strict. Always remember, even if you're in an element of strict, know when to pick your fight as well. Yes. Always remember that. Don't just react to everything. Sometimes you might have to just say, right, I need to calm down here. It's not the time to do it. Look, I've been involved myself in industrial disputes where times maybe we shouldn't have walked out. Maybe shouldn't have gone on strike. And there was a couple of times. I won't elaborate on there, but it was just that was just silly. We didn't actually need to. We could have actually just stayed in the plant and things could have been easily resolved there. So times, strike, yeah, pick your moment. Always pick your moment. You don't want that to backfire on either, because it's not a guarantee that you'd win either. So, but the fact is, at the end of the day, yeah, that's your basic form, your ability to withdraw your labour. That's your power you have got. And important, and to always where you do need to talk to your officials, because sometimes of legal constraints in Australia here, if workers do face fines if they take what they call unlawful industrial activity, okay, if they just automatically withdraw their labour and walk out. So you do need to pick your time, learn your terrain. Unfortunately, and as a comrade once said, I was listening to the Black Agenda report, but one time, very good podcast. So I recommend downloading that and listening to it at times. One comrade actually did say we have to operate under the material conditions that we're operating, or that's imposed on us. And yes, we do. That's a reality. We have to operate. So at times we do have to work where we under. Not just at times, all the time, we do have to operate on that. So just check that out. So laws vary from state to state, and no doubt from country to country as well. So always to keep that in the back of your mind. You do need to have good, sound knowledge of that. But bringing them back together, the most important thing is to have good unity across the board amongst the workers. Because if you don't have unity and you have division, action's impossible. Obviously, if you want to advance somewhere, well, you're not going anywhere. So you need to keep those certain common things you can be united around. Safety is always a good one to unite workers, because even some of them are a lot more sceptical or a lot more hostile than, say, unions, but they do agree no one wants to go to work and be killed. You don't go to work to be killed. You go to work to make a living. All right, you're not there to live to work. You work to live, etc. So you can put food on your table at night, so you can pay your bills, so you can have a house over you. So you can have a house or a roof over your head, so you can have clothes on your body. So your basic essentials of living. You can have electricity and education, etc. So that's something it's always a good one to work on as well, is around the safety side of it. It's very important, and ensuring that their safety is applied. Thirdly, now when we're talking about more advanced ones, if you do get to that, this is where it's important, where we need to, this is very important, where we can try and do the education. As I said, this is a challenge. It's challenging, it's hard, it's not easy. But for example, say if you've now got a highly unionised place, you're out on strike. Okay, you've done all your best to bargain and come to a resolution. It's just got nowhere. The employer says, no, you're out. Oh, no, not giving you any more. You're out. Or the boss locks you out. Okay? That's actually a really good time when people's consciousness is actually a lot more heightened, or they're a lot more alert about things. And it's a good time that we can make them connect the dots. They're saying, well, it's not just because he's a bad boss. Boss might be a very nice guy too, but he's done that. Well, this is capitalism. This is capitalism 101. Boss can be a very nice, most pleasant person on the planet, but the fact is, he's got to make profit. Otherwise, he's not in business. That's capitalism for once and for all. And he has to exploit the workers. Let's have a nicer person, or even doesn't matter how nasty he is. That's besides the point. He has to make profit. And this is a great opportunity to educate workers then, and to develop further. So it's not just a merely the boss has just been a complete arsehole and doesn't want to give us a little bit and he's made us so extra amount. It's not about that at all. He might be a complete arsehole. And unfortunately, we don't have laws stopping them. Under capitalism, we certainly do not have laws stopping them from being a complete arsehole. But the reality is, at the end of the day, he has to make profit and got to maximise those profits. He might make $500 million this year. Next year, he's got to make $750 million. That's capitalism 101. That's what he does. And where does he get that profit? From your labour, from the wealth you produce, etc. So that's where we can learn those basics. If you go too technical, you can lose it from them. But basically, if you want to talk to workers, in this manner, and I love this old little movie called Make One. It was based on the coalfields disputes of the 1920s in Make One, West Virginia. A brilliant movie, came out in 1987. But I liked how the actor who played the organizer said, there are those who work. That's you guys. You produce wealth. You create all this wealth. You work. Then there are those who don't. They take it. That's all you need to know. And that's basically saying the two forms of basic class struggle: labour, all those who create, and then capital, all those that don't work and take it. And that's where we need to start raising that, where we say, well, hang on, yeah, that's right. We are workers. We are labour. We are actually more in common than what we ever thought we'd be. regardless of what your skin color is, what your nationality, country of origin, etc. We're all in this together, and that's vitally important why we need to move forward with this. So that's a really good place to educational thing. The other one I've actually sometimes talked to workers when I've actually addressed them as well. I explain them how the profit system works. I said, well, you've got your overall costs of the business, be it your machinery, your computers, paper, etc., all the things that the business needs to run. So the boss has got to pay for that. Make that A. And plus B is the cost of your labour. Then, and obviously equals C, which means the commodity that's whatever's made at the end of the day. So if you happen to work on a food production line, for example, making tinned fruit or tinned vegetables, okay, we made some tinned tomatoes. Well, that tinned tomatoes is the overall cost of your labour and the established in what we call existing labour that was already in through your machinery, through your technology, etc. Now, say it was basically 100 plus 100 equals 200. Now, let's look at B. They will make that 100 again. That's where the boss needs to make where the employer, the capitalists, need to make their profit. So they'll give you 50. They've already paid for the cost of the existing labour, of all the machinery, the running of the plant, and cost your labour, and they'll take the other 50 for them. And obviously, that's where they make their profit, the basic thing. Now, at the end of the day, we need to make sure we need to have enough to make us exist. Now, you're not going to go out and buy tinned tomatoes and that's it. You obviously need to pay other things as well, other food. You need to pay your costs of living, etc. Right? Yes, that's where we need to have a look. But obviously, what's there next year's got to make greater profit. Like I said, he's taking 50 off you now. Next year he's got to take 75. So further and further and further, he's reducing what you're entitled to, or we're basically reducing the value of your labour, and that's in order for him to make more profit. So that's where that is. So that's where the system of profits made. If you've got that basic understanding, there's plenty of reading about political economy, and I did say I was going to talk a little bit about political economy, and I will touch on that now. There's a great old book, and I know things need to be updated as well, but Political Economy, a Beginner's Course by Leontief. And I ordered this from the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninists. They've got copies of this. And they've got some great questions and in this as well, which we can relate to today. And obviously explain about the different social systems we lived under, from primal communal through to slavery, feudal, capitalism, and socialism. This was written around that time of the I think about the 1930s period and that, but it's certainly some questions quite relevant for now. And obviously you can see what's happening. You can actually then see what's opening your eyes a lot more and see what's happening around you. So it's vitally little practical things like that. So that's where you do get to address it. You're not going to win everyone overnight. That's where I'll make that very clear. I'm not going to guarantee you're going to win everyone over just like that. Wish I could. There's no magical one solution to this. If there is a magical wand, or if you know someone's got that magical wand out there, can you let me know? Because I need to borrow it for at least a week. We can have a different discussion later on. But it's not going to be like that at all. It's going to take a lot of patience. You're going to have a lot of things that fail as well. It's all practical things. Am I a professor? Am I a professional at this? No. I mean, sure, I've got a lot of experience on my hand, but am I perfect at this? No. What I'm just saying, if you ever want any suggestions or ideas or want to talk to me, feel free to do so. Sometimes make little comments, and I might be able to try and answer them for you as well. Now, hopefully that's giving you some little practical guide about trade unions. Look, this whole idea of trying to say, labour aristocracy, unions sell out, unions don't do anything, that is real capitalist ideology. They've really got everyone. The capitalists have really got you there as well. So, no, they can be effective or fighting organisations of the working class, not just really around a wages and conditions thing, but around politically and politically and ideologically as well. And obviously we want to actually break away from that wages and conditions thing and lift that consciousness further, that we do need to change society. And we're one that actually everyone has got ownership of what's produced, not just a minority, which is getting further and further smaller in the world today, as we see today. So obviously that's where we need to do. It certainly is a big project, but without when we're talking about revolutions and changing society and that, one thing we do need still to have is strong trade unions as well, in one form or the other, or industrial unions, whatever you want to call them, combines or associations, etc. We do need that. That's where workers can learn collectively that they can advance the interests further. And instead of trying this rampant individualism like I've expressed before, that by yourself you can't advance your interests further. And this is where we're trying to break that down. And look, there's so much resistance against collectivism out there, against unions, etc. We get that. It's not all surprising at all that they'll do every trick in the book to try to stop that ever happening, and especially in places where, how I'll put it, especially in areas where it's really ultra conservative. And yes, we've got workers that are ultra conservative as well, and it's going to be hard, but we do need to work with them to win them over to a proper class consciousness as well. And obviously, look, a lot of workers are alienated now. They're disillusioned. That's because of the material condition, the economic conditions around them. They've seen everything being taken off them over years. And obviously, I've watched other live chats with Caleb Morpin, etc., and others that are talking about Donald Trump. Why does a lot of working class people support Trump? And answer yourself that. Why? It's not because Trump's a great man, and it's certainly not. He's a whack job. We understand that. But the fact is, what did he do when he first got elected? He touched on their economic interests. Remember, these workers saw their steel mills closed down. They saw rampant neoliberal politics, the policies of Martin Friedman ripped through their communities. Once you had working class communities, both at work and after work, you had social clubs, you had sporting clubs, you had working class atmosphere, you had even neighbourhoods you could walk down, you felt safe. At that stage, you had that stability, and that's what they missed. That was all ripped from them. And over the years, and obviously, and this is what I'm going to talk about, just a little bit about the left, where it abandoned all of them. The left basically abandoned the working class. They left it, and unfortunately, what happened with the conservative or the right wing of politics has taken over that gap. They've moved in, and they've turned these things into populism. And Trump is just the product of all that. And when he expressed about these free trade agreements are dumb, well, actually 100%, they're completely dumb. There's nothing good about them, and we don't benefit from them as well. And when we see rampant job losses, insecurity, we see crime, drug abuse, and all the social ills that go with it, obviously, that's why they were going for him. Hell yeah, this is what we want, and everything else. And unfortunately, and then this is what's happened. And it would have been, and I think that's why this is why important when we get to the political and ideological struggle, understand that our own leader is going to come from our own class as well. And that's why it's important. It's a class that's got to come into power, and it's vitally important. Not wait for the next knight in shining armor to come along and save the world. It doesn't work that way. That's why we have a lot of work to do. So hence why I answer that little bit of a question as well. Why do workers come conservative and support the likes of Trump? Look, I don't think there's any live chats. I'm not going to comment about the US elections at all. Look, it's certainly not. Yeah, who knows what's going to happen around November? But obviously, that's why he became appealing as well to him. So they've lost everything, and obviously he's come along, said and touched on what they've been talking about for such time. And unfortunately, this is where the right does. They actually cause division. They pit worker against worker. Basically, it's immigrants that are the cause of your problems. Oh, well, it's China that took your jobs. Well, no, China didn't. Man, let's also make that a fact as well. It was businesses made a decision through our respective governments to close everything down and move it offshore to China. China was developing it and that at the time. But actually, interesting, I had a little discussion with someone who was a Chinese national, and funny enough, a supporter of the CPC. And he said, we in China cannot work out why workers in all these countries didn't do anything about these free trade agreements. How completely dumb. Why didn't you stand up and do anything? And I said, well, because we've actually been disempowered over this time. But he said, yeah, and they haven't came in. So China didn't come in and take our jobs by force. They didn't come in and take over government or anything like this. This was all completely solved by respective governments through their policies and by the backing of big business. They're the ones we need to get the anger directed back towards again. It was like, hey, no, it was your party when you're in government. It was you lot that put these policies implemented and allowed all our plants to be shut down, machinery moved overshore. It was your whole policies and that caused us all these social ills. And these are the social policies of capitalism. So it needs to be the class, not just the government, that needs to be changed and needs to be directed at. It's also the class of the world, or the big banks, or the billionaires, etc., the Murdochs of the world. That's really the ones who've been causing our problems all these times. So that's obviously from the political to the ideological level. This is where we need to start having some good, serious discussions about moving forward. I'm just looking wary of time as well, and I hope this gives you some sort of outline. I'll do some more talks on that as well. I'll just want to give you a little bit of history too about the early Australian trade union movement. Obviously, I've touched on it before, and I'll just a little bit deeper about it. It really came about, as I said, because we had a lot of workers either were forced to come over here by both imprisonment, or they are basically fleeing their countries of origins at the time in the 1800s. And obviously at the time, industry was still big, industrial stuff. It wasn't really that big compared to what it was by the time of the 1900s, of the 30s and 40s, etc. At the time, a lot of workers here were both rural based. There was more people living in the country than were the cities of Sydney and Melbourne, for example. Mining was pretty much the first one of the industrial side of things that kicked things off. You had the gold rush of the 1850s. From then on, then company mining after that, and through both when the companies took over to dig gold further down in the ground, from also coal mining, etc., and then first minerals and other forms of minerals that came about. So mining was pretty much the first one of the industrial work. By the 1880s, 1890s, we had a huge wool industry. Wool was the major commodity and still is, still was right up to actually the later part of the 20th century. Was still a major commodity that was exported to the UK into the textile mills there. And obviously there was produce as well, and meat, etc. And of course the railways were being built, etc., to service all that, to bring all those raw materials to port to be exported to the empire. Britain at the time, and because mind you, Australia was part of that British Empire at the time. Australia, the unions formed under the various state administrations at the time. There were various what we call trades hall councils formed in Victoria. Here were the first ward. We have Melbourne Trades Hall, which is now known as Victorian Trades Hall. First one actually was in Australia. The second one was Ballarat, which was only about an hour from here in Bendigo, and then Bendigo Trades Hall Council, which third one, the area where I live in. And except they all popped over everywhere. So those who are wondering what a trades hall or trades and labour council is, in America you guys call it a union hall, I think it is. That's obviously they were formed by the early unions at the time, so we could probably unite together. And it was forms of forming the unity amongst workers and how we organise better. Obviously, come the 1890s, it was the first ever for Australia anyway. Or the Australian colonies were the first of the capitalist crisis for us. But prior to that, it was actually Australia was described as a working man's paradise. You had work everywhere. And obviously the employers then the big disputes were not just cheap labour, lowering wages and conditions, but also the term of using free labour, aka scab labour, not union labour. And there was some bit of disputes that happened with the shearers in the regional areas of Queensland, New South Wales, the Great Shearers Strike of the 1890s, and also the Great Maritime Strike as well, the 1890s as well. The same thing. They use what the scabs were known as the blacklegs. Now, the term scab, if you ever want to know, that came from an Australian term as well. It was actually devised by the shearers that are on strike because when they sheared a scab off a sheep or whatever, and bled profusely. So that was the insulting term to call a strike breaker. And if you actually wanted to know too, the Australian song Waltzing Matilda actually came out of that strike. Banjo Patterson, I believe it was Mary McPherson, that made that song. It was actually about a union organiser. Now, the early union organisers at that time of the 1890s were basically your swagmen. They did work as well alongside the workers, but they travelled the country and they organised as well. So they didn't have all the transport of a horse and cart and carriage at the time. They had to ride the trains to get to work. They had to hitch on the back of a cart or whatever, or just walk a lonely, dusty country road and get to these places to work. But they did the early formation. A lot of them were good orators and that's how they worked. And they'd only pop into a major town or city once every 6 months. You feel lucky just to drop the tickets off and all that, etc. So hence, and that's how that song came about during that period, Waltzing Matilda. And someone asked me, I wonder why that wasn't our Australian national anthem. Well, of course, the powers that be do not want a song about early trade unionism and trade union organisers as a national anthem, of course. And we had to wind up with that, for God save the Queen, for many years until the early 70s, and then we got Advance Australia Fair. But I won't talk about our national anthems. But that's happened through there. There were some bitter defeats, and then after around about 1900, things started to pick up again through that period as well. And through that period too, other unions were starting to be created, the textile unions, obviously a lot more major industrial-based trades. I think one of our predecessor unions, the union I'm in now, with the Boilermakers, they didn't perform until about 1880 period. And obviously the engineers came out in the 1850s. Time and period as well to form the early metal and engineering unions as well. So, but with the advancement of railways that build up the unions, and also shipbuilding and repair, we realised, because we're an island nation, we had to start forming some dockyards and that. So you could see the eventual formation of other early unions through there as well. And then obviously the industrial workers of the world played a very big critical role the early 1900s, right through World War I up to the 1920s. They were radical. They unionised a lot of the unskilled in the bush, I would call the regional areas, and that the one big union, and they played an instrumental role at the time. Now, at the time as well, of the 1890s onwards, was a formation of the Australian Labor Party out of the unions. At the time, that was quite radical back then. It was a social democratic party that, to where it is now. I won't get into the whole thing, but at that very time, the 1890s was quite radical. The thing is, it wasn't as such as what we know as a socialist or Marxist party. Mind you, all the teachings of Marx and Engels and that was very limited and very few and far between in those early colonies at the time. Some people did have connections to that, and they were actually played instrumental roles in the forming of that early Labor Party as well. But out of those disputes and out of those defeats, there was actually the need for we need to actually also have political representation in Parliament. So the Labor Party was formed not for the seizure of power of the working class. It was there for merely for more representation in Parliament in order to also legislate reforms in favour of workers. And obviously the first Labor governments we had was the early 1900s. IWW, obviously, when they were going back to them as well, they were obviously hostile to that. They were actually hostile to parliamentarianism. There's a great little song called Bump Me Into Parliament on Election Day, and obviously they wanted actually more revolutionary industrial unions, and they believed in everyone one big union, all they need to do is spin a big sit down and we can change society that way. They were bitterly, they were defeated during World War I, the anti-conscription. We had a massive, when World War I did break out because of the crisis of capitalism around the early part of that decade, there was a lot of support for World War I at the time, just at the outbreak, but within a year or two, there was complete opposition to it. There was a massive anti-conscription movement here in this country at the time. They realised what it was. It was an imperialist war. We were fighting for king and empire. We weren't fighting for each other or anything like that. And I think a lot of those workers that went off to war soon realised it when they were either Gallipoli or on the Western Front there in the Somme, etc. So. And a lot of them came back actually from World War I, and actually they came card-carrying members of the Communist Party and socialists as well. So there you go. It certainly things do change, and most material conditions change, people's ideas change. But the IWW certainly played an instrumental role about that. We had leading figures like Monty Miller at the time. He was quite elderly, but he travelled all across Australia. He was arrested on times for sedition. The Prime Minister, Billy Hughes, wanted to continue on with the policy to the last man, to the last shilling, to the last sheep, while Britain endlessly into war. And now, obviously, there was a major backlash against the war policies at the time from the working class, and it was actually working class led, the anti-conscription. There was middle class elements, but there was working class led. And there was a referendum on conscription, and it was defeated big time. So it backfired magnificently on the likes of Billy Hughes, etc. At the time, the IWW pretty much started to phase out of the time of the early 1920s with the formation of the early Communist Party. In October of 1920 it happened, and that's when Monty passed away as well. It was that time when Marxists in this country, many of them realised, because it was under the back of what happened with Russia, the Russian Revolution, and a lot of our wobblies actually changed over to the CPA. They actually were reading the early works of Lenin, like State and Revolution, etc., and realised, well, actually, yeah, we need more than just one big union. And this is where I'm talking about higher levels of organisation, political and ideological, and realised we are a class and we need to seize power. And they obviously used the Soviet Union as a model at the time, which will look, we can all talk about the early communist movement as well, and wonder why actually through the Comintern period, which we'll study tomorrow, basically a lot of communist parties around the world used the Soviet Union as the model, because that was the only model we had. There was no other model. So there was the Paris Commune of the 1870s, which lasted a few months. Well, now we had something on a large scale of a complete country. So we had something we can base something on, hence why a lot of material from there. So, but a lot of communists actually were heavily involved in unions right up through the late part of the 20th century, and a lot of them took leading roles, and some very strategic, important unions as well. It had a very big, important influence on Australian life here as well, both the CPA and their role in the union movement as well. A lot of the things where we enjoy today, from basic things like the weekend, overtime rates, etc., were actually were fought for by workers in the unions led by communists, interesting enough. And so that's where we've, and for many years as well, Australia had a safety net, or called an award. Now, just I don't want to get too technical. An award book is basically, it covers an industry, occupations, etc. It's basically it's a basic safety net. And when it first developed in the early 1900s, it was there to cover the basic cost of living. So what did a worker had to afford to buy from food, clothing, shelter, water, etc. And that became the underpinning thing that for our conditions throughout the country. But we made some significant changes. Communist-led unions also were involved in a lot of social causes, so hence the political and ideological things throughout from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, etc. I'll give you one classic example. When the Indonesian people were fighting for their independence against the Dutch, the waterside, all the waterfront workers refused to load the Dutch ships. They were held up. And throughout Australia, and even that years, all those ships were held up. Nothing was loaded from there on. So basically, the Dutch Navy were stuffed. And we played an instrumental role in helping the Dutch. I'll rephrase it, not helping the Dutch, but helping the Indonesians liberate their country from Dutch colonial rule. And I'm talking about before Sukarno, Suharto, and all that, etc. And also another role they actually played as well, and I think quite importantly, they played a lot of internationalism as well, helping other workers out in other countries as well. We used to actually hold ships up at ports when another group of workers in another country used to be out on strike for whatever. We hold those goods and everything else up at port. We refused to touch it, etc. We'd also help each other out in that sense. And even too, like if one union in this country is having a dispute with one employer or a group of employers, well, the union's saying, well, we'll hold up their goods, we won't touch their goods, etc. So they, in a way, they formed that unity across the board as well. So that just gives you one classic example. The other one, too, I'm going to show you the book, The Four Green Bands Red Unions. That's a great book to read. Now, it was never done ever before in the world, I understand. It started here in Australia. It was actually protecting our built heritage. Now, a lot of the working class, right up through to the mid-70s, there's still quite a fair of them living in the inner cities of your major cities, etc. Well, come the 60s, during that boom, the property developers came in. They wanted to knock that all down and move working class people out of there, because they saw prime waterfront land, etc. Move them out to far-flung suburbs in Sydney, etc. And of course there was resident action groups formed, etc. But what they needed help? They needed help from the working class themselves, and so they approached their respective construction unions. And the Builders Labourers Federation in New South Wales, one of the first to step up to the mark and actually and they agreed to it, and they put a vote to their members: nothing's to be demolished. And they put first of all, it's called a black band, but we actually called it a green band, the first green bands. And It was on our built heritage and our natural heritage as well. We had a block of land, bushland on Sydney Harbour on the Parramatta River there. One of the last remnants of it was up to be bulldozed and then put for some rich toffs to live on some exclusive waterfront property. And the residents there kicked up a storm, but the Builders Labourers Federation stepped in. Not an inch of soil is going to be touched, and there was a complete ban on the site. And followed with unions. It was supported by unions such as the Crane Drivers Union, the Federated Engine Drivers and Firemen's Association, etc. So, and it had popular support throughout especially the left-wing unions, and that played a very important part. And also, too, throughout a lot of the, besides enjoying a lot of the historical buildings and complete suburbs that still remain intact to this day, it also challenged capital. This is where we're talking about the ideological thing. And how did it challenge capital? It challenged how dare you? What right have you got to kick working class people out of their cities, their homes and everything to demolish it just so you can make more profit? What right do you have to do that? Since when? Ever humans first walked this earth, you had the right to do that. Never. And I know we live under a capitalist system, but it challenged that. And obviously, it had the authorities and respective powers to be worried. And obviously, they used everything, their power to try and smash that union as well. And caused internal dissent, the whole lot. So, yeah, obviously, that's something I just wanted to use some examples. I could be here for hours on end explaining about Australian labour history. It's very rich. Australia did lead the world in trade unions, in not just wages and conditions, but all sorts of social issues. We played an extensive role in the anti-nuclear side of things. Unions actually played the leading roles in the anti-Vietnam movement here and all the Vietnam moratorium movements here, the 60s and 70s. Interesting why it was so successful, because it was working class led. That's why it was really successful here. When there was obviously big campaigns about that, and strikes about that as well. So that's why it's vitally important. We're talking not just of wages and conditions. Yes, that's what unions were primarily set up for in the first place, but also move up to higher levels of struggle as well, and what we can use. And obviously, that still to this day still has the powers of being concerned. If they have got all of a sudden workers uniting again, they've got a problem on their hands. That's why we're divided at the moment. That's why they're trying to keep us socialists and communists and Marxists, whatever, isolated from the rest of the masses. They will try and do everything. And it's Caleb Maupin sort of say we've got to jump out of the movement and get back into the masses again. And we do need to do that as well. We've got a huge task ahead of us in our respective countries. Major big task. I think I'm not going to, as I said, I'm not going to, like I've said throughout this video, I'm not going to profess it's going to be easy. It's going to be hard. We're going to be up against the real reactionary stuff at times, but we've got to do it. We've got to do all the door knocking. We've got to do it, talking up to community groups, etc., union meetings, the whole lot, and put a way forward as well for them to do. And it's got to be practical experiences what they can do as well. So I just wanted to give you. I know I was a little bit ad hoc about things and it wasn't so smooth about in this video, but I wanted to just explain about how we can go from lower forms of struggle to higher level forms of struggle and some practical things we can do within it. And look, Marxism is not about just knowing all your stuff in a book, right? Putting it down and that's all it is. It's a living science, scientific socialism. It's a living thing. It's there to apply. It's a toolbox. It's not a dogma. It's a toolbox to be creative with and to apply what conditions you have to operate under at the time. And obviously, with that also too, don't try and work alone. Some of you might feel a bit alienated or you might be alone at the same time. So I'm trying to develop links with other people. You might not even develop links with other comrades, but different people altogether. But at least you work with things in common as well. That's an important thing. Don't try and worry about points of disagreement at times. Yes, look, we're all going to have to agree to disagree at times. I've had that argument billions of times. We come to a certain point. What's the point? We've got more in common than what we have different. We'll agree to disagree on that at the time. At least you know where I stand. I understand where you stand with it and leave it at that. But we could need to concentrate on the bigger picture of things as well. So hopefully this has been some form of help. So look, one, join your respective union, and to get active too, you obviously be in touch with your local branch or /local, and three, make sure you go seek their advice about how you're going to operate at your workplace or your industry, etc. Especially if you're in a hostile environment, how to actually be how to actually work covert with this as well, so you don't getting tapped on the shoulder and losing your job for not just that work, but throughout the industry as well, which we don't want to lose. And four, once you start moving on and things develop, how we're going to moving on from an economic, not just an economic, but to a political and ideological struggle as well. So that's where we do have. That's where we are, and I want to just give those examples of what we can be moving forward. There are certainly big examples, but we've got to start forward. How does a tree grow big? It doesn't just all of a sudden automatically overnight we have a big tree in front of it. It starts off with a little seedling first, and it's obviously we've got to plant those seeds again and start and cultivating them as well, in order for them to grow into big trees. It's look, folks, I'm going to let them finish up in a few minutes' time. It's been an hour, and I think, especially you guys in the US and stuff, it's coming later on a Friday night. But look, I just hope I've been some help there as well and some assistance. And if there's any questions, feel free to put something in the comments. I'll try and answer them to the best of my ability. I might not know the answer straight away, but I'm just trying to put some of those nonsense things we can do. But make sure if you do make those connections to workers, make sure to find out where they're at the first and take up their issues. Okay, don't go into with preconceived ideas as well. There's either one you'll be let down in a spectacular fashion. Two, your workers will just look at you as just some complete weirdo and think, who is this guy? You need to make those connections and find out what their concerns are and work from there. And it's important. And I know it sounds boring at times, wages and conditions, your bread and butter issues, but that's where we need to start again. I know we want to come up here, we want things to be up further up the ladder. I know. I get that. I've been down that path myself, but hopefully for this one, start with the basic bread and butter first, and then move forward according to what, then move forward in according direction you think that might need to happen. Look, I just got a question, a couple of questions in live chat. What party do you support? I don't support any of them. To be honest with you, I'm not going to endorse any of them as well. Look, I'm independent of any party. To be honest with you, I do get along great with a lot of people. All things I think at the time, my personal opinion is, look, and I'm not putting any of the CPs down, I'm not going to put any of the social democratic parties down and stuff. I think we've got a lot more practical work, and I like that term, get out of the movement, get into the masses. When you join a party, you do have to take the party line, unfortunately, and I'm fortunate on certain things. And look, I can see that there's some good comrades in all those parties as well, some excellent comrades I've got a lot of time for, been over backwards for, etc. And they make a good contribution to things as well. But I think, look, at the end of the day, at the moment, I want to join a party, none particularly. I want to just be myself, just not just work myself individual, but I do work with all people right across the board at the moment. And as I said, I work with all sorts of people at the same time. Different opinions, different views on things, and that's perfectly fine. I get that. But yeah, look, what party I support? No, look, I don't endorse any of them at the moment. And as well, never know, may in the future. Let's see where we go with that. So thank you for your time, comrades. This is the first of many videos. I did do one last week. It's just a little bit over an hour, and I want to go and enjoy the rest of my Saturday as well. As I said, once again, we'll be live again tomorrow with Comrade Dos James. We'll be finishing off the history of the 3 internationals, and well, not tomorrow, but we've obviously got a couple more chapters there. I'll have discussion too of any other stuff we need to read. And as I said, I hope I've tried to be a proof of some assistance here as well. Each week we'll make some different commentaries and etc. And I'm certainly a lot of you international comments are certainly quite interested to know what's happening here in Australia as well. I'm led to believe you don't hear too much from Australia, and I know Dad probably with the New Zealand comrades as well hear from much. And it's good that we can actually reach out and explain that. Well, look, we're under the same attacks as you guys as well. We are part of that US imperial bloc. Obviously, you're seeing all the aggression towards China. The Australian military is all tied up with the US one as well. Without going too far of the track, but you understand the allies and the commander of the Allied fleet in the Pacific is the US. So it ties up Australia, New Zealand, etc., and Canada a lot. And yeah, this whole aggression towards China at the moment, it is very concerning. There's going to be a lot more talks on that as going for the future. We're certainly under a lot of attacks here, the working classes. A lot of them haven't realised that yet, but our wages and conditions are certainly on the chopping block as well. Employer groups are getting everywhere to lobbying government to see what they can change in industrial relations as well. And the cost of living is certainly becoming a lot harder as well. And with this COVID-19, certainly exposed a few things, but it's obviously made life a lot harder for a lot of working people, especially the working poor. So we're in this all together, comrades. We're I just want to say you're not alone. We're all in this around the world. There's a worldwide movement. It's not just one country, etc. Certainly things are different now than what they were 100 years ago. And I think, look, at the same time, revolution is on the agenda worldwide. I think it is big time. You can see a lot of countries around the world, and obviously, to my thoughts also go out to the people of Lebanon as well. And as you probably will aware, what happened with Beirut the other day with the big explosion, that my hearts go out for you. That was certainly that was just catastrophic. The people of Lebanon are really on the verge of just complete collapse. And my heart does go out for you and the people of Yemen as well in their struggle, etc. So for all people around the struggle, we're in this together, one form or the other. And just want to actually also quote this as well from Miles China at the time: is dare to struggle, dare to win. If you don't fight, you lose. Thank you, and good night and good morning.